Council to order. Is there a supplementary agenda?
No, there is not.
Any disclosure of pecuniary interest, direct or indirect, in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we'll get right into item 4, infrastructure and engineering services.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, and members of the public. Today, I'd like to give a brief update on some of the work that we're doing out on Erie Shore Drive, trying to answer a lot of the questions that have been posed to us as well, and to address them here tonight, and also to really talk about some of the challenges we're having as well. So we're going to talk about just a quick review on the reasons we went forward with the closure. I'd like to talk about some of the provincial federal government funding status. That's been a question that continues to come up. Some of the work that we've done on the fringe areas, and also the construction itself on Erie Shore Drive, the challenges and next steps. So on February 28th, we met here in Council, and we received a report from our engineering consultant, Golder, and based on their assessment, which they've been really reviewing the area for the last 3 to 4 years, is that based on the stability analysis, visual assessment, and also the current lake level and predictions and storm frequency, that there was a 5 to 40% chance that conditions would render the dike unstable, leading to a significant breach. And there was a sense of urgency to move forward to close the road, complete some construction works for the good of all the public safety. So many times we've had our meetings, we've been asked, what has changed? And what has changed is that we've seen now some degradation of the road over the last 2 years to a point where it's concerning to us for safety. The other thing is that chart in the bottom is very important. So that blue line to the left on top of all of the graphs is 2020, and that's where we're starting this year. So if you look at past history, that center line curve is the average. So you can see we're significantly above the average. And each year above that, 17, 18, 19, you can see if things continue, we could be off the charts on that particular lake level indicator by about the June time period. And so when we went forward, we're continuing looking at not just the way things were in the past or today, we're also looking for the future. So a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to address where we think we're going as opposed to where we are today. So some information from the province. The province published their flood strategy announcement on March the 7th. I've included the link here that you can all read on in greater depth. It's a comprehensive document, but some of the key points is that they're saying, first of all, local governments hold the primary responsibility for identifying and managing the flood risk. So they're definitely putting that on the municipality. Also, the federal and provincial governments must play a key role in supporting local decision-making, but there's no mention of any financial. A third point being is that the private property owners also have a role in financing improvements to their properties and to shoreline protection works to help mitigate flood and erosion risk. That's found on page 38 of the document. So that's the province's stance. Federally, we have our local MP here in the audience today. Thank you for coming. He spoke and attended both of our public information centers, and I appreciate that support as well. He answered a number of questions back on March 3rd. But funding programs are available, but they're currently not accepting applications. There's a shortfall of funding. Mr. Epp is trying to move forward and to get this addressed at the budget, which has now been slated as March 30th. We should see some type of announcement. So let's start with the fringe areas. So on the fringe areas, this is outside the closure. We initiated work on 2 strategic areas because we had structural concerns. One is entering Erie O, and the other is on the west side of Erie Shore Drive. We reinforced with armor stone. Some of the stone had fallen into the lake. We pulled that back. basically, again, to bolster the area. And we know this is an area that we're going to have to continually maintain as well. So these are the two areas. You can see it's just south of the BizNet on the top slide, and then on the lower picture, we looked at the entrance of Erie and also along McGetche's Pond. We did some work there as well. What it looks like is this. On the left-hand side is what we've done entering Erie, so it's a much stronger structure. And on the right-hand side, that work just was initiated today, so we're working on it. It'll be a similar look to what you see there on the left. So the construction update on Erie Shore Drive is as follows. The project is currently ahead of schedule, but we're highly weather dependent. We've had 2 work stoppages. One was on Tuesday of this past week, and one was actually today. We've been asked many times about the government approvals. I can assure you they're all in place. And we've had 425 deliveries of clay to date, along with concrete blocks, 8 tons in each of those deliveries. So there's a lot of clay out there now, which you're going to see shortly. In accordance with the engineering recommendations we received, and also our own internal staff, we have gone forward with the spillway reinforcements, and we've also eliminated 2 of the spillways to minimize water overtopping the road. The blocks themselves have moved from the west lane, and now they're on the road center line. We had some limitations we found in the field with really locates. One was water, and one was hydro. So we had to make some adjustments. We had originally planned to put the blocks further south, but because of those utilities, we could not do that. So the farthest south we could go is essentially on the center line. We have done the safety analysis on it, looking at the slope stability. It's still adequate. The weight of the blocks and clay has been often asked, is that a concern? And it is not. And just a quick calculation I did was the blocks themselves compared to a very heavy Class 8 truck is like 1/100th the amount of pressure on the road compared to those vehicles. So it's we're quite comfortable with that decision. And also the maintenance corridor, as a result of moving these blocks, is now increased. So I originally showed you about a 2-meter width. It's going to increase to about 3.5 on average. One thing is that nothing is consistent out there. We have hydro poles located in different spots, so that fluctuates quite a bit. Also, the west closure location, we modified that slightly. We wanted to tie it into a hydro pole to minimize some of the unauthorized access and also to improve the overall safety. So here's the first sketch, which shows you the blocks now where they're at is on that center line. The red portion you see is the clay backfill. And typically means in engineering terms, it can be a little less, it can be a little more, but typically that distance of clearance now for the maintenance corridor is 3.5 meters. Here's some of the pictures, some of the clay we see coming in. So on the left-hand side, we loaded the clay up behind the blocks. On the right-hand side, you see the excavator, and it's basically compressing the clay, creating a very solid structure as well. So we're doing that all the way along. You can see if you follow it down, we've got a lot of clay out there now, and the teams are working very hard. On the spillways, we use the geotextile fabric to secure the rocks and also to give it greater strength. On the right-hand side, you can see we put armor stone in place and also a curb, and that was really because of the fact that we wanted to try to find a way to slow down the flow of water, which is gradually eroding the slope. So that was the concept we came up with. And now to the challenges. So we've got, first of all, we've had, unfortunately, unauthorized entrances by both residents in Erie Shore Drive and also non-residents. We have been addressing those very quickly. Some were surprising to us, where we still have that issue of gawkers who just want to see what's going on, and they've driven right through the closed road sign. So we are addressing that. We also have extremely limited space available to perform the work. We only have 1 lane, and at times we're always respecting public property, but at times we have heavy equipment running down the road in one direction. We'll have a pickup truck running in the other direction, and we will pull the pickup truck off and utilize a driveway. We're very careful with this. But the downside, if we didn't do this, we'd have to back up those vehicles to a new entrance and then drive all the way around. So we'd have safety risk associated with that. And also, we would also see the project would be essentially significantly delayed, we believe, as well. So we appreciate the public's support to allow us to use driveways. We're trying to absolutely minimize that. And if there are any damages, we'll certainly repair them after the fact. The other challenge is certainly is the weather conditions. I mentioned we had 2 delays already on March 10th and March 13th today. I was out there on March 10th, and it was a normal day. It was raining when I was going out there, and as we started to work, the wind picked up. We had significant flooding, and we had to stop the work in 2 specific areas, which I'll describe in detail. Luckily, at that time, we were ready to pull the troops out of the area, but the wind shifted, which is very common out there, and we were able to continue the work. Today was a very similar condition. It became of concern for safety for our employees, where we had to pull them out of that area to get the work done, to vacate the area. So the root cause is really the failed break walls, and these were existing prior to the closure. I know it's a challenge for all the residents to keep up on the break walls. Again, the water level continues to go up. We've talked about the wave energy is very, very high as well, and as a result, the break walls as they stand, a lot of them are really inferior design, but they also had to be continually maintained, really, to be to act the way they need to. So the issue for us, from an engineering perspective, is we're doing a lot of good work out there, but in these 2 areas, we cannot optimize the dike strength. So it's continually being flooded. We're looking at maybe putting additional blocks or clay on the right-of-way that is to the far south. This would further restrict our access, so that 3.5 meters I talked about would be reduced substantially. And I just, until we resolve this problem, the dike, we feel, is at a risk of failure in these 2 specific areas. So, the best structure is only as good as its weakest links, and these are our weak links right now. So we really need to do something about that. The owners in these 2 areas have been contacted, and I want to say that these are the areas of risk today. We have a very dynamic situation out there. Things are always changing, and that we fully expect that we'll have additional risks in the future, and certainly as the lake level changes. So here's the 2 areas in question. Area 1 is further to the east, and once it floods, we just did a simulation that this is typically what we see, but when it happens, you can see the 2 spillways there up on the top. That's why they're there, to drain that area, but when that happens, it happens very quickly, and we really have to stop the work. If you look to the lower part of all the addresses as well, you can see the variation in the break wall design. And this is something that many of the residents have told us. It came out in the ZUZAC public information centers, is that there's no consistency in the break wall design, and this is something we really all need to move to. So you can see the variation, and where we see a lot of you can see the lake levels in property 100 and also 98. I mean, essentially the waves are crashing right behind the properties. This is just a picture. You can see the snow. This was taken in January, but it's a continual area of flooding for us. So next is Area 2, which is around the 250 and the 260 addresses. The same situation exists. This is even more prone to flooding. In this case, there is virtually no break wall. This is the result that we see. And this is, you can see that one picture, that's the mailbox. The road is completely flooded. This is the area where the primary failure is, right through those 2 homes. So the one on the left just shows you what the water freely flows in, and we tried to zoom in on it to show you like any water coming up there easily enters. If you see on the left too, the size, that it looks like a tree almost, or a bush. That's actually a wave that's splashing on the left side right in between those 2 homes. So it's a very dynamic situation. Again, lots of high energy, and it's really destructive to a lot of the break walls. So the next steps we'd like to do is that we need to find a solution to mitigate the risk, especially on the 2 flood-prone areas. Again, we've made the contacts to the owners. We have not got that issue resolved at this time. but it's something we absolutely need to do in order to progress. If we're unable to solve that problem, what will happen is that we'll have a structure out there that will continue to be inferior and is still at risk of failure. We're going to continue working 7 days a week. Our typical day starts at around 6 and ends around 7, so about 13 hours a day. And once all of this work is completed, as promised back on the 28th, we will go out there, we'll do an assessment, and see if we can reclassify this area or not. We're targeting the Phase 2 report by April 27th. My team has been working very hard on designs. They're clearly underway, and also we've been working with Mr. Zuzak, who's presented here in the past, and we're going to incorporate his ideas into some of these proposals. I also wanted to remark, again, changing dynamics out there always. I may be back with further actions as the lake levels increase or the storm events occur as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have 3 quick slides. What has changed? So I won't reiterate what Mr. Kelly just told us has changed, except to say that this past week on Tuesday, we received concerned call from Mr. Kelly and his team who were down on Erie Shore Drive. They were concerned because, as he explained, the winds had turned, the water was crossing the road, they had to stop their work. And because of that, they identified the 2 locations that he has just reviewed where he would like to stop the water from crossing the road. We've identified 6 properties where they would like to go onto the private property and install berms or some type of stop to not allow the water to rush across the private property and onto the road. So that was presented to us, and from a legal perspective, we, of course, needed to stand back and say whether this was absolutely necessary as an emergency, and they should just proceed onto private property and do the works, or whether we should approach the property owners and find out whether they would consent. So that's what we were faced with in our dilemma. We decided that we needed to notify the owners, and I would say that I have this week developed a relationship with the lawyer for the Erie Shore Drive Property Owners Association. We have been on the phone at least once a day, sometimes more. He has been good to speak to and reasonable, and he's been helpful in communicating through to the association members in getting us contact information for these 6 properties. So we have been trying to reach out to these 6 property owners to get their consent. Unfortunately, it's been time consuming, and we've not been able to, as of yet, reach all of the property owners, and we still don't have any consent from any of them, except I would say that most of them have been positive, but what they want are details, and details, we haven't had the details yet. So we're looking to bring details to the owners, maybe a drawing from someone in the engineering team about what we might go on their property and do. And then I entered into discussions with the legal counsel for the Property Owners Association to discuss what the legal relationship might be or what it might mean for them to consent. So we've had discussions, and obviously he has proposed one option that is perhaps reasonable and would have been reasonable in normal circumstances, but I'm not sure is entirely acceptable to us given that we're going on the lands in this kind of urgent situation and we're having to address this problem at our cost. So we're trying to negotiate that, and in a spirit of complete transparency, we're going to go into closed session after this open meeting and discuss that with you as council. So in addition, we found that 2 of these 6 properties were really problematic, and I asked the chief building official to make a visit to them. He did so, and he's found 2 of the 6 to be unsafe. So this presents an additional problem. Again, we want to be transparent about it. The back walls of these two structures are missing. So when I say unsafe, I mean they are very unsafe. The chief building official advises that he doesn't think they're worth saving, and so he will be issuing an order to demolish on those properties. We, again, are trying to reach out to the owners of these properties to advise them of this. Again, it's a little awkward because we understand that we have, because of the work we're doing on the road, taken away the owner's ability now to even get access to their properties, and we want to be cautious about just putting orders on the properties now. That's not, the two aren't necessarily connected. My understanding, or from just our assumption, I think, is that these properties have been in a very bad position for at least some weeks or months over the winter, as the waves and the ice has probably damaged them. So we're dealing with that issue as well. The last slide that I have here to talk about is simply to say that if the conditions worsen on the road, and if the engineers feel that they need to get off the road because the dike could go at any moment, I want everyone to understand that because we've declared an emergency under this particular statute, the mayor then has powers to order whatever he considers necessary to protect property and persons, essentially. So in that instance, it would be the mayor's call, not council's decision, but it would be the mayor's decision to allow staff to go onto private property without consent and to do whatever it takes to essentially stop the dike from breaking. But we are going to be very cautious before we exercise those powers. We would only do that in an instance where the engineers are really saying this dike is going to go, or this situation has to be addressed. Otherwise, we're going to be very respectful of private property and continue to work with the property owners and try to get consent. I think the challenge for us right now is that after 5 days, despite conversations with the property owners and with the property owners association's lawyer, we're still not there. So, I'm hearing on a regular basis from Mr. Kelly and his team that they need to get on the property. They want to put up some type of berm to stop the water for the next storm. And after 5 days, unfortunately, we're still not there. So we're working hard at it. This is basically an update for council. That's the extent of my slides. Obviously, I have more slides to cover in closed session. Thank you.
I understand Mr. Kelly's going to be coming back up with some more slides to add in and to discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. We had some additional information that sort of relates to some of John's advice that you want to get into that needs to be discussed and closed. Some of that, Thomas had prepared some additional slides in terms of some of the work he's been doing to lead up to that. And we were struggling with that. And there's nothing of a secret that shouldn't be an open session, and we're happy to share that. But just with a caveat that some of the information is still a work in progress, and we don't have definitive information about costings and some of the other issues. But we had made some commitments when we first went down this road that we were going to be pursuing the phase 2 in parallel with the phase 1. So we wanted to give council an opportunity to consider that, and then John's legal advice might very well pertain to some of those other issues. So it's we're doing a bit of a change in progress here. So Thomas is just loading that onto the slide deck.
So thank you, Mayor. This is a summary of where we're at with far as design concepts. I'd like to first thank, they're not here today, but I'd like to thank the drainage team for all their assistance, Tim Dick, Jordan Gray, and Brigham Barlow. They were very helpful developing these concepts. So we have looked at probably 5 different concepts. We've got it narrowed down to 2 concepts. And the first is moving the drain northward, raising or improving the dike structure, and then adding drainage to the south. So we've gone through the numbers, and again, please don't hold me to these numbers at this time. We worked very hard, but let's call it around the $6 million mark. It's a desktop analysis at this time. There are contingencies built in, but that's what we're looking at. And if done under the Drainage Act, it would be shared by those who benefit, basically. So that would be private properties, which you could argue is not only Erie Shore Drive, but also Erie O. Agricultural properties, which are 33% funded from OMAFRA, and then also the CK Road. And one of the concepts, we have the road on Erie Shore Drive converted to a trail, but we would still have an Erie O Road as well. The distribution of these costs and how they're allocated would be determined by a third-party drainage engineer, and it's always based on the benefit. Who's benefiting the most would pay the greatest sum. There's also, as we heard, potential for federal DMAF funding that could be outside of the Drainage Act. At this time, based on the information I presented earlier, I'm not really confident that there's going to be anything from the province, but still hopeful from the federal government. It also assumes in this particular design that the Erie Shore Drive residents maintain the break walls to a defined standard. And if that's not the right assumption, certainly the costs will increase as well. So this is the concept, maybe a little difficult to see, but if you look starting at the top diagram to the left is where the lake is. We have a break wall, which is that red vertical line, a typical house, some trees, and then as you move to the far right, you'll see our first catch basin, basically, that would be located on multiple properties. Right now we have 6 in place, but that particular catch basin would run all the way down from the west to the east to a stormwater management pond, which I have further details on. So if you go to the bottom diagram now, you see what happens is that catch basin then feeds into a rather large, basically a storm drain that runs that length. And the road is the portion you see in red on the left. And from there, we build up about 1.5 meters to the new dike height. Okay, so we do that by backfilling the clay. That section below that, that's where the current drainage, and we move that about 30 meters or so to the north. So this would involve acquisition of property or some agreement with the farmer, possibly through the Drainage Act, who would be compensated for that through the Drainage Act. We move that further north, but what we like about this is that what you see is a significant increase in the ratio of support. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio at a much higher height, which is based on climate change height. So we're extremely comfortable that this could be a solution that could be implemented and done so as well, we hope, in a reasonable time frame. So just to show you the extent of it, so again, off to the left, it's difficult to describe this without a pointer, but essentially there's a high road, which is called Erie Shore Drive. Just below that is called the Dike Road still. We would tie into that. So what you see is tying into existing drains and then also tying into the existing roads. So on the previous slide, that top of dike is something that we could convert that to a road. Our thought was to leave the existing road where it's at and create a drainage system. The advantage of doing that is that you can always go back as weather changes, as the lake changes, and we can continue to build very easily up on the dike and create an even stronger structure as weather requires. So this is the west end of it. Essentially, everything is moved vertically to the north, about 30 meters. And then to the south, this is describing, so I've got a storm drain coming all the way down the road along, it would be on the south side of the road. To the right, you see that pond. That's a new creation. It would then feed into that pond, and we'd have a pump station there as well, which when it was filled and had enough adequate water, it would pump it back into the lake. So it gives a lot more capacity than we have now. We also have where you see the current internal drain, the Burke internal drain. We would have an overflow capacity there as well that if it was warranted, we could also use this additional drain, this new drain, and the stormwater management pond to manage that as well. So everything you see in the blue indicated there is all new construction, again, about 30 meters to the north. Next is design number 2 per the Zuzek study. So unfortunately, the Zuzek study was going to be shown to you on the 23rd of March. It's been delayed. It's been delayed because Peter wanted to do more work, basically, and more comprehensive work, which I think is going to make the report better. So we're probably looking at the April or May time period. He has come up with 3 solutions for Erie Shore Drive, and this is focused on now shoreline protection. So Peter presented a number of different concepts. This one is really to make a very robust type shoreline, and doing that through armor stone. So he's come up with the costs ranging from 37 to 70 million. The downside of this certainly is the cost. The cost is directly related to the life. So the $37 million solution is the 20-year life, 25 is somewhere in between, and the 50-year life is at the $70 million figure. So this also could be done under the Drainage Act. We would have the same concept. Those who benefit would contribute to the funding. And again, we're hopeful that we could maybe have some offsets through the federal government DMAP program. This is what it would look like. This is a 50-year solution I'm showing. And one of the concepts and one of the concerns about this was that you can see that he's building it to the 100-year climate change water level. And in order to do that, that's an extremely high dike. It actually now takes the viewing away from the cottage or the home. And he's come up with a couple of other proposals which are less expensive, that are lower in profile. Again, all of these we're still developing, but I just wanted to share with everyone this is where we're at right now. So again, our goal is to now really focus in on 2 primary designs, both of which you've seen. We need to develop the cost and refine the cost and also the timing of each. And we plan to do that and have for you on the 27th. It won't be detailed design drawings, but it'll be directionally correct, so it'll allow you to make some decisions. Thank you.
All right, I'll open it up for questions from council now. Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Thomas. Tom, can you go back a couple slides, Thomas? To the where you had the pond and everything. Yep. The pink line is that the road? Is that what that line stands for? Or is that drainage?
Thank you, Mayor. So this pink line is actually our storm drain, and the red line would be the new top of dike here, or the orange line. And this section here is all new, and you see in blue. This would also be all new. It's essentially what we have today, but it's moved north about 30 meters. This would be existing. This would be new.
Okay. Through your worship. So in this design here, the actual road would be able to be used. Is that correct?
So looking at this design here, again, what we looked at is that, and the technical reasons are that the road as it stands, we feel it will be hard pressed to maintain that road. It will be a challenge, and it would be our recommendation that we do not use the dike system as a road. So we have the option for the road to just convert it to a trail, for example. We could maintain it as a road. It would be very expensive to do that, or we could move the road up to this area here at the top of the dike. We'd like to avoid that. That's really where the road belongs, but it takes away, when we have that, is the flexibility to increase the height if need be. So we're trying to create a structure here that's going to be good for 70, 100 years, as opposed to the situation we're in right now.
So putting this out there, there's no road in the future, basically.
That will be a council decision. It's our recommendation that, again, this be converted to a trail, even a private drive that the residents would maintain, and that we would essentially, just because of the nature of the situation there, the changes in the water levels, and what we're faced with is we allow the residents to convert that to a private drive, they maintain it, and we would just focus on, our business out here would be focused on the dike and reinforcing the dike. It's just a concept at this time, and it's really, again, it'll be a council decision at the end of the day. If council want a road in place, we will incorporate a road.
And then, through your worship, your first presentation, you showed the blocks with the clay behind it. Those only look like they were the 2-foot blocks. I thought we were going 4 feet.
Yes, we are. That's correct.
Oh, okay, so there'll be another set of blocks placed on
Yes.
top of those.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Latimer?
Thank you. You answered two of my questions. One was, is there going to be a road or not? And I understand you're recommending for design one, there not be a road that the public or that the municipality takes care of, correct? Sorry.
Yeah, that's our recommendation right now. It's just, again, because of the conditions out there, it'll be extremely challenging for us to maintain that road. It's our recommendation, again, if directed by council, we will put a road out there, but this will be a road that, it will be a very special road because we'll have to put additional maintenance more than any other road in Chatham-Kent.
All right. So design one means you're going to do what you're going to do, and there will be a road there, but the residents will have to maintain it. What's the reasonable time frame? You said it's a reasonable time frame. What is that?
That's the part that we really need to get into deeper depth on. Using the Drainage Act, it could be one of the things. The Drainage Act is a very good act. It was created for a reason. It's extremely fair, but anybody who disagrees with the overall design has an opportunity to appeal.
Okay.
That appeal can last anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. That's the concern of that. So it all depends on the residents and how accepting they are of the concept. And that's the whole challenge behind it, is the timing. It's an extremely fair process. It's been used for years and years, and it allows everyone to have a say. So for those who don't wish to have a road, and there may be some who wish to have a road as well. So at the end of the day, the design engineer, the drainage engineer will design it accordingly, and then partition out the cost based on a certain percentage.
However, if it does take 3 more years, your $6 million cost estimate has just gone well beyond that, correct?
That's correct. The longer we wait, the higher the costs. Yeah. And I would
and
also say that the concern for me, and this is why the timing is a really very detailed discussion, because of the fact that I'm not confident that the structure we have there today, based on what I've seen on the water levels, is it's going to be robust enough to last that long. We're going to be out there, we're going to be maintaining it, but that's the concern for me. If I had my choice, I'd be working on this within the next month.
Well, that's my concern too, because while this is in the wings, we have our maintenance costs.
Yes.
Every day, it's costing us. Mm-hmm. The more we plug in there. All right, that's it for now. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. So I just have a couple of questions. I wanted to make sure that in this $5.9 million, ballpark, there are no provisions for any shoreline repairs or maintenance, right?
Thank you, Mayor. That's correct. We have assumed that the homeowners, the residents, will maintain the breakwalls.
And we don't have a role to play in that?
This is our assumption on design one, which leads to the $5.9 million. at the bottom you can say if that's not a good assumption, and I'd like to know that if it's not, those costs will increase substantially. Certainly that's a cost. The break walls do form a part of the system, which is important.
So I guess what I'm asking, though, is so on that last line that assumes ESD residents, yada, 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 would that not be the same or potentially be the same sort of funding agreement that we see on the first line?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Let's see here. So when we're talking about this trail or private drive for the homeowner's access, I guess in my mind, are we talking about peeling the clay and the blocks off of the current roadway and calling that a trail, or are we talking a whole new trail or private drive?
Thank you, Mayor. So that's exactly right. So the structure that's there today would be removed, and we would this would now become a trail with essentially the materials that are there today.
Okay. I'm not sure if you could answer it, or maybe John could. At one point, we were talking about how some of the homeowners were interested, or at least amicable, to allowing us onto their property, but they're looking for details in regards to what our potential work would look like. It sounds like that's the sticking point. So when could we have at least some sort of outline or details to them?
Mr. Mayor, we hope to do that as soon as possible over the weekend, I hope.
Okay, because I think that would go a long way to trying to get that particular situation addressed. I've got nothing else at this point. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan?
Hi, thank you, and appreciating you may not have the answers to some of my questions now, but putting them out there for future reports if you don't. Regarding the current state update, I'll ask questions about that first. The comments that you made about the berm proposal for some of the flood risk areas where the dike is really weak, can you confirm the location of currently where you would be proposing putting that on private properties? Is it between the dike and the home, or the home and the lake?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So our concept would be that we would repair as close to the source as possible. So we would put that south of the properties. So the break walls are there now. It's very difficult to get access to them, but that would be our preference, would be to repair essentially the break wall.
Thank you. Can somebody give me a bit more detail on how the chief building officer came to do the home inspections? Were they done on all of the areas and the road is closed, just in the areas that it was weak? Like how did that come to be?
Mr. Mayor, I have a lot of information to provide in closed session. That's one of those questions I think we should answer in closed session.
Okay, fair. Do we have and so thank you, appreciate that. Do we have an idea or any assumption around what the cost dollar value investment would be for a homeowner to maintain their break wall to the standard that we're expecting? I think some of the assumptions when you move into the design futures assume that a break wall is maintained. Do we have an idea of what the cost is for that, or could we find that out?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we can find that out. That's something more deep dive I'd like to do. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I asked the question because as we all know around the table, we have the tile loan program. I think it's a maximum of $50,000 every year at 6% as a loan. I'd be very curious if we could implement some form of a pilot with the homeowners. If we're going to be making assumptions around dike repair, then we should be facilitating access to funds to do it is something that I think anyway. So I'd like that information.
If I could add to,
Yep.
One of the things that's really important, and when we had our public meetings, everybody agreed with this, is that we need to have a consistency of design as well. And that's something we don't have. So it would be our proposal that as repairs are made, we start to work toward that design standard. And then everyone can be assured. There's people in the audience today who have told me that they've repaired their dike, their neighbor didn't repair it, and they were the recipient of that, not the neighbor. So everybody has to be in agreement with it. And that's one of the advantages of the Drainage Act, is that even though you don't have 100% agreement on the petition, as long as you have greater than 50 plus 1, representing 60% of the value and the benefactors, it becomes really a new standard, right, that everybody must maintain, and that's the way it works. So it's a really good piece of legislation for us in this case.
And again, I don't know if this is the proper place to have the conversation, but I would think the easiest way to do something like that would be to leverage the municipalities' resources, networks, RFP process to go through it, and then have conversations with the homeowners about some agreement around maybe we facilitate the work that gets done and or the repairs that are needed, even if it's something the homeowners are paying for. Like, I think that a very creative P3 model of partnership is the way forward if we're making assumption in future solutions that the break walls are repaired to a certain standard. I think if we're making that assumption, we have to facilitate the financial ability for homeowners to do that. And then around the options and the timelines, the option 2 identified the $37 million for 20 years or $70 million for 50 years. So just doing kind of quick math, the cost then would be either $1.85 million annually or $1.4 million annually. We probably have to pay it all at once, but for that life cycle, right? Like if we're looking at what we're investing in for the time that we're putting into it.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is some of the additional detail I'd like to bring forward on the 27th. So is to really determine the best solution, but whether it be the 37 or the 70 million. With every one of these solutions, there's a maintenance cost as well, which Mr. Zuzak is estimated to be 1%. So it's not insignificant, but in order to maintain those break walls, you have to continue to invest, as every Erie Shore resident knows.
Yeah. Is the reason that you didn't provide a number of years for solutions on option 1 is because we don't know how many years of a solution option 1 would provide for us with redoing the dike system? Like, it looks to me that the pond is still a man-made drainage structure that's combating the power of the lake.
Yeah, so we're very confident with that design. It's one that we've utilized really across Chatham-Kent already. Some of them have lasted 75, 100 years. There is maintenance required, but it's far less than a break wall, certainly.
And then with the design in number 1, where does that put the home or the residential properties kind of in relation to the rest of the drainage? Like, again, I'm just trying to kind of see, but it looks like the lake is wherever the lake is, and the home is here, then the dike is up here, and then the field is there. Is the home higher than the field or lower than the field? Like, how does that, like, where is the home in terms of its relationship, right? Because everything drains down. That's something that I have learned.
The fields are lower than the, water flows downward, and the fields are actually lower than the homes. So this, again, is one section. There are homes, which I just showed you, are right on the break wall. There are homes that are, I don't know, maybe 10 feet off the road as well. So that's just a conceptual sketch, and that's some of the homework we would have to do to detail that out. But that's the concept. The concept is that we are raising the dike, and at the same time we're providing drainage, because we know that'll be an issue with this concept. The Zuzak concept is you put all your investment in at the break wall, and you don't need all of this additional work. So that is a possibility that Peter is considering right now. I think we still need to do some work on the north side because of the current status of the slope and the failures we're seeing.
And then just for, it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but some may not be aware, a solution like a $37 million solution exceeds 10% of total of Chatham-Kent's budget every year, correct? That's a big chunk of what even we have in terms of our annual budget. In other words, we can't afford that, is what I'm...
Thank you, Worship. You said it was rhetorical. Ultimately, Mr. Kelly said a few times, this is very preliminary. We're trying to be as forthright as we can with people, and there's no secrets, but these are all preliminary numbers. We have no indication right now whether there's going to be any other sources of funding. We've just talked about some mechanisms that we could actually get us there. And at this point, the best figures we have, you have. So
I'm sure this goes without saying, but I know I would appreciate, even if it's just in a consent agenda, kind of a status update of what's going on with Erie Shore Drive. I think the communication's been excellent, so if we can maintain that, if it's till the end of April that we're waiting for our next update, then those updates would be appreciated.
Hey, Mr. Kelly, I just want to get one clarifying point here. You've talked about design 1 and design 2. So design 1, it's one or the other, it's not both. Is that correct? So if you do design 1 and you have the seawalls maintained properly, that is one option, or is it completely go to the other, or is it a combination? Please help us all out to understand that.
Thank you, Mayor. So it's either one or the other. It could be a combination of the two, but at this time, based on our assumptions, it's one or the other.
But design 1 would really entail the piece of it would be maintaining the break walls, as we pointed out there, in some standardized fashion somehow.
Thank you. Yes, that's a key assumption in this, that our $5.9 million does not assume any liability for the municipality to look after the break walls. It's the property owner still. Okay. And I put that out there. If that's a wrong assumption, to please let me know. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Scotchy.
Thank you, through your worship. Most of my comments have been asked. I guess a couple things that Mr. Kelly and myself, I've had conversations about the tile and loan program myself, and I thought that would be something that potentially we could utilize as well. And I know this is in the very early stages, but one question I would have for Mr. Kelly would, how much, number one, benefit the homeowners with the drainage aspect? I'm aware of the fact that, obviously some drainage would be a lot better than that's out there right now, but how much benefit do you think from an engineering standpoint that would benefit the homeowners?
Thank you, Mayor. So the design we're looking at will drain 8 inches of water in 12 hours. So right now, what's out there now was never engineered. It was never recommended by engineers. It actually weakens the dike. This solution here is an engineered solution. And with every solution, we make an assumption. That's our assumption. And I think it's a reasonable one. We typically see that the water floods and within a day or so, it's usually gone. But we also have to account for the changing lake levels, and that flooding could get worse as well. That's our assumption right now.
And the other thing I was going to ask, so what about mitigation in the water for the problematic areas? Is there a way that could play a role in the first design as well? Like the problematic areas, obviously we see that even if they put a break wall in, it would have to probably exceed into the water. Is that something that would be also? I know that this is basically saying they would maintain it, but those problematic areas, is that something that we could put some mitigation in the water to stop some of the force of the water coming in? Particularly the highlighted areas that you sent to us, that you showed to us previously, sorry.
Yes, as directed by council, we could do that. I'm assuming that other landowners would think that's unfair, though, because why are we assisting some property owners and not others? That would be my concern.
And another question I would have for you as well. So we're speaking about it as a trail. I guess I need some definition about, what that's going to mean regarding a trail. So is this going to be, a paved trail which is easy accessible to vehicles, which is accessible to our fire department, that we can at least, if it's a cost to them, or how it works regarding winter maintenance. I need to, I know this is the early onslaughts, but I would have to have some kind of knowledge of the definition of what that trail would be. And a follow-up question to that too, and maybe it's more for yourself and for Chief Case, is that because of mitigations that's happened out there right now, are you able to now safely get an emergency vehicle into that area, since you're speaking that it's 3.5 meters in most areas now?
So if your question is, are emergency vehicles able to go out on the road today or tomorrow, the answer is no. And we were quite specific about that when we closed down the road, is that during the period of construction, there was never any indication that there would be access by emergency vehicles. That was one of the reasons we were so strong about asking people to leave. And we went the extra step last weekend to go back out to homeowners. There are some homeowners that have elected, understanding the risk, that I think there's 4 homeowners that have elected to stay and another 4 that might be back on the weekends. But there is no expectation right now that we can actually deliver emergency services while the construction is going on. And that will have to be reassessed after we finish the phase 1.
Okay, so I guess just a follow-up question. And what about when it becomes a trail then? So like, would that be something, if it's a trail, my kind of question, maybe I did word it incorrectly, but my question would be, if it becomes a trail, what are we then going to be able to do? Because I've never seen a circumstance like this, so I would be, ignorant for not asking.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with what Mr. Shropshire said in terms of that has yet to be decided. I know the fire chief is in the room. Certainly he can address this, but I think it's probably best at this time we kind of don't address those issues and wait until we get these options in front of council. Council's going to have some decisions to make about whether we put a road in that vehicles can get on or not. That's a decision that hasn't been made yet. But I think Mr. Kelly, I was just asking him if by trail he meant something that would not be a public highway. I think that's what he's intending by a trail, that it's not accessible by vehicles.
So I guess just the last follow-up question, actually more maybe just a statement. So I would hope that if we're conversating about something with this big of impact, that we would have it more than 5 days before the meeting, because this is something that is obviously going to really impact the people out there, and it is our duty to advocate for them. So hopefully, this is something that can be kind of we'll have a community community information sessions like we've had. We've been successful in the past, and I'm hoping that there's a way that we can come up to a better solution. But I appreciate the time.
Councillor Finn.
Councillor Sakachi touched on part of it. If you suggest a trail and possibly a private road, will we be accommodating them to have a service vehicle go down in case of an emergency?
We're going to talk in closed session about some of the options that council might, I think if in closed session we're going to be able to get into at least understanding some of the other legal options that council will have. But really, council's going to make those decisions in terms of making decisions about what's going to happen. I think what's been presented today is just some design options, and they're very preliminary.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Through you, Thomas, design 1 and 2, how long are those repairs? How long would each one be?
Thank you, Mayor. So design 1 is what I described earlier. I think the actual construction would be approximately 8 months.
No, lengthwise.
Pardon me?
Lengthwise, like how long? Lengthwise.
Oh, the length?
Yes.
We're suing about 3 kilometers, 3.3 kilometers, which is the entire Erie Shore Drive. It's not just the closure area. Thank you.
And number 2 is the same?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should rephrase that. Number 2, we're considering 3.3 kilometers. This particular design was only, it'd be about 2.4 kilometers.
The other question, the repairs, is it area rated for taxes? Or does it go across Chatham-Kent?
Thank you. Through the Drainage Act, it's back to that other slide. So costs are petitioned, as you see above there, based on a drainage engineer's assessment based on benefits. So if the private properties, for example, benefit 25%, they would be allocated 25% of the costs, and also the ongoing maintenance as well. Agricultural properties, they get a 33% funding from OMAFRA. Their range can be 25 to 50%. It all depends on who benefits. And the last one would be ourselves.
Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Mayor Kenneth. Quick question about the Phase 1 construction, Thomas, in terms of cost. How much have we invested to this point in the emergency repairs that are ongoing right now? And is that $450,000 target that was mentioned at one of these another meeting that we had, is that still accurate? Is that still what is kind of that staff is targeting? And can you fill us in with that?
Thank you, Mayor. So certainly that's still our target. We have been able to manage most of the costs internally. So that's been a big benefit. The other side of it, though, is that the job's not done. So I'm a little reluctant to say where we're going to end up at this time. But we are definitely doing quite well out there, except for the weather events. And that really slows us down. So I think we're on schedule. As I mentioned, I think on the 28th, was the clay that we have received. We have not had to pay for. We pay for the trucking, but not the clay itself. So that's been a big benefit. And that was from our Waste Connections corporate partner.
And also with the idea about, I know we still have to discuss that, and it's still being worked on, I guess, with installing these berms on these properties. What are we talking about cost for that? Or how much is that going to be?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have that number at this time. If given access, we would go out, evaluate, and we can come up with an estimate. But because it is private property, we've been trying to respect it, and we haven't got into the complete details. We can see the results, we can see the water coming in, and we know we need to repair it. But until we go out and do a deep dive assessment, I can't really comment on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Kelly. I'm interested in the Drainage Act. A couple things about the Drainage Act. First is there's a rumor that the Drainage Act, discussions with Erie Shore residents with respect to the Drainage Act had occurred years ago. And by years ago, I mean in the last 5-6 years with respect to flooding matters. Is that true, false, urban myth?
Thank you, Mayor. So we've had a number of discussions. Actually, we came to council at the end of 2018
yes,
with a report and a recommendation to use the Drainage Act. The landowners could go forward with a petition,
right,
again, meeting the requirements. And that would essentially, what we were proposing here, that would have been what you see here on the lower corner, is that they develop a drainage scheme for themselves to move forward with this. And it didn't involve really the municipality. That Drainage Act petition, I believe there was some interest at Erie Shore Drive, but in the end, it was never presented to us.
right. And the petition comes from the land, is generated by the landowners.
That's correct. That's one option, and that's the option we were proposing.
Okay, thank you. And the drainage, the other thing I think you explained pretty well, the costing of the Drainage Act, how it's allocated among benefiting properties. But is it also up to the drainage engineer to determine the size of the area covered by the drainage scheme? Or proposed, I guess, by the drainage engineer?
Thank you, Mayor. So that's exactly right. So you determine, again, what is the benefactors of the drain, what is the property truly being drained, and who downstream benefits from that. So that's all up to the drainage engineer, which he uses to determine the allocation.
Right, yeah, exactly. That changes the voting scheme pretty heavily. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Pincinel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Thomas. Yeah, earlier on in your slides there, you said if we decide to use the drainage program, Did you say if only one person goes against this, it could take up to 3 years?
Well,
Like
with the
opposes it, is what I
Thank you,
mean.
Mayor. So with the Drainage Act, what the process is, we assign a drainage engineer. He goes out and he does his work. He'll do some detailed calculation. He'll do surveys. He'll determine the entire scheme. He'll then come up with a design as well. And once that design is developed, he'll have public meetings. He'll get input. He'll determine a cost. And that will be his recommendation. That'll be his report. At the end of it, he provides a report. If there are some, though, who, even though you have a valid petition, that they do not agree with the design, they have an option to appeal. And that appeal goes to a tribunal.
Okay, so that's my question.
Right. So this is, council designated our drainage group, our Drainage Act, to be managed by a group of 5. All of those go to that group. And then if there's an appeal, it will go to a tribunal, which is the second level.
Okay, so say somebody does oppose this and it goes to the tribunal. Is that 3 years, or, because time is of the essence?
No, it can be a lengthy process. The 3 years, we've had some that have been worse and we've had some that have been less. It all depends. It all depends on what the issue is, how many are bringing forward their concerns. I mean, you could have a situation where there are multiple different opinions, right? So they all need to be heard, and it's like the court system. That's what it's like. Sometimes it can be done very efficiently and sometimes not so efficiently.
With the concern of this one, because it does affect a lot of people, would they move that up quicker, or I guess you can't speak for that?
I can't speak for that, but certainly based on the concerns structurally and what's going on out there, we would certainly push extremely hard for that,
right,
to get some prompt decisions in place.
Because I'm assuming you are going to have, because there's money involved here, you're going to have people that are going to oppose it. Thank you.
Councillor Foss?
Just to continue on with that, the 5.9 million, and the Drainage Act takes 33% of that. So if we divide the balance over to, 123 residents, it sounds like it could be an affordable amount for each landowner. Am I reading that wrong, or?
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't know if I agree with your 33% comment, but the 33%, so if the, maybe we'll take some round numbers here. So if the amount was $1 million, right? And let's just say those 3 areas were each assessed a third, right? So agricultural properties would be assessed a third of $1 million, which would be $333,000, right? The OMAFA group would kick in a third of that. So to the farmers, they would only have to pay $222,222 because OMAFA would kick in $111,000. So again, it's all up to the drainage engineer at the end of the day. He is an impartial view because we have a stake in this as well. So we have to pick a third party, and it's up to him to determine the allocation. And he'll determine that allocation based on the perceived benefit for each of those major groups.
Okay, just to clarify then, the balance of that, whatever that number is, would be divided amongst the 123 residents.
Yes, that's correct.
So if we divide that over that many, we're probably looking at $4,000, $5,000 per household. Would that be?
Again, you're making an assumption that it's going to be a third. It could be 50%. He may allocate something different. So I don't know if we can make any assumptions like that.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he may determine, just for example, he may determine the break wall is 90% residents, 20% Chatham-Kent. He may determine that the storm drain is a third, a third, a third. He may determine the dike is much further downstream and less to the residents. So he's got to go through all of that analysis. He may come up with different formulas for different investments as well.
I believe everybody that wants to speak the first time has spoken. I will, given the topic, I will allow some individuals to ask some further questions Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Scotchy and Councillor Finn.
Thanks. The only question I had came to me through online, actually, in regards to social media. Wanted to know, and it tickled my brain too, that at the time when we were talking about this drainage petition, that the association was asked to hold off until the Zuzik report was returned. Was that not the case?
Yeah, we met with the association in January, and the work that he has done is of benefit to look at that and to determine next steps. So, we recommended you might as well wait to see what that data says. It may change the determination of how you want to proceed.
Okay. The only thing else I wanted to mention actually was, as we're talking about this, and we're discussing, a trail versus a private road. I couldn't support a trail. I might be able to support a private road, but I would really want to see some sort of access returned to those property owners there before I would even consider raising my hand. And the only other thing I want to mention, so council's aware of, like an average break wall is $40,000, $50,000 per homeowner if they have to cover all of those costs. So this, as it sits here, is an expensive fix for everybody involved, and I don't think I could call it cost effective per se. So that was the only thing I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Councillor Scotchy.
Thank you, through your worship. Most of my comments have just been made by Councillor Thompson. I received the same comment, but I just wanted to add one thing that was very important, is that many of our residents, not just on Erie Shore Drive, but across the municipality, is waiting for this report. A lot of people that are waiting for some kind of mitigations are doing their responsible thing, by waiting to see what the educated approach is going to be to stabilizing, whether it be a bluff or their area. So I think that it's really important that we recognize that some of these people are waiting, and that the holdup is this report. So I really hope that it does come in April, because that is going to be able to allow us to look at things, from a very high level. But in respect to this conversation, I think a lot of things that hasn't been done the last little bit out there is because, we are speaking about a universal solution. A lot of them are very respectful and being very diligent, realizing we need a standardized approach. So I just wanted to kind of elaborate on Councillor Thompson's, comments, because, I couldn't agree more. And I've also heard multiple times about these topics. Let's wait to see what basically let's see what this report comes back at. So I really appreciate you letting me have that second comment.
Okay, that's the last of the comments I see. So given that, we'll move on. We're going to create a 4B here, other business. And anybody have any other business to bring up? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Very quickly, I guess I think, thank you to staff for all the information about the emergency that we're dealing with over on Erie Shore Drive. But I'm sure everyone in the country and the world right now is aware of another emergency that's going on, and with the COVID-19 pandemic that's going on. And I know that Dr. Reet Dyke and Dr. Colby are here in council tonight, so I wonder if we might probably get an update on some of the news that happened locally here today about COVID-19.
Thank you, Councillor Hall, for the question. I think I will just start and then let Dr. Colby answer any questions that Council has specifically from the medical side of COVID-19 and the impact that we will see across the country. So what I'm hearing from a lot today is what has changed. So a couple of days ago, we were all kind of moving along, tickety-boo. We knew it was out there. And we knew that across the world, people were dealing with COVID-19. I want to state right from the top that we have no cases of COVID-19 in Chatham-Kent. But what we are doing is we are putting in place, along with our provincial government to look at doing whatever we can to mitigate the impact that this virus will have in Ontario. So what has changed from Wednesday through to Thursday, and I don't have the numbers from Thursday to Friday, we had a significant increase in cases in Ontario. So again, not CK, Ontario. And we are starting to see countries of travel that we did not see before. So hence why the government has indicated that they would like Canadians to not travel outside of Canada. The government has also worked with our school boards and with public health to look at closing all of our schools for an additional 2 weeks after March break. And certainly it's a really good opportunity to get ahead of this. With students already being off, we certainly have that opportunity to say, let us keep everyone safe as best we can. Some of the impact that we are going to be working with as we navigate through March break is if families have gone away, when they return to Canada, so if they have left Canada, children that are 17 and under will have to be in quarantine for an isolation for 14 days. Adults 17 and over, or 18 and over, need to self-monitor for 14 days. So these are some significant impacts that we are seeing. The government has also requested, and that is the province stepping up and saying, we're going to get ahead of this, to stop all mass gatherings of 250 people or more. And that includes the people working at that gathering. So if you have 50 staff working at a gathering, you can only have 200 people attend. So we should be at 249, really. So in terms of numbers. So that gives you kind of an indication in terms of that. So I think it's important for us to get the messaging out that public health staff has been working for quite some time with our acute care partners in developing our pandemic plans, in getting ready. We are waiting for provincial approval to look at opening a separate assessment center. We hope to have that very quickly, and we will get that messaging out as soon as we can. So what we have done as a municipality, we have canceled all programs within our municipal facilities. So at the Capitol Theatre, at our museums, at our libraries, our Parks and Rec programs, and Dr. Colby has also asked, and I'll let him speak to some of his thoughts, that all youth and children and youth programs are canceled for the extent of this 3 weeks. And we will be reassessing after that 3-week time to then determine where we are in terms of how we're going to move forward. I would ask that council, if you are asked questions, to send those questions to us, and we will answer those the best we can. And so certainly we can do whatever we can to minimize the impact. I also want to thank council for doing social distancing. And I think that it's really important to note what we've done tonight is spread our councillors out. We've moved EMT out in terms of allowing that space to be between people. And that's really important in terms of decreasing transmission is, for any better way of looking at that. So we do have, and I didn't tell Dr. Colby I was putting this up here. So I do think this is a really important graph. And so while we've only indicated the number of mild cases in our Chatham-Kent Public Health Unit area, and you've got a baseline, but I think if Dr. Colby would like to explain what happens to that curve if we begin doing school closures and remote work and social distancing and improved detection. And if we do detection and social distancing, you see that flat line happen. And so that's really why we are taking these measures right across the province to get ahead of the curve and to get a handle on this disease for the as minimum amount of impact that we can have provincially and specifically here for CK. So I don't know if you want to add some stuff to that.
Thank you, April, Your Worship, and members of council. Closing schools, closing children's programs, banning mass gatherings, this is not what we want in society. But what we want less is what happened in Italy. And if you don't know, there were a few cases that were noted, then there were a few more, and then there were a few deaths, and then all hell broke loose. And I'm not speaking colloquially. There were so many cases that their medical system was completely overwhelmed, and people died and are dying today without even getting to any kind of medical help. So when you see a situation like this, where you see a sharp peak and sudden incidence and geometrical rise in the number of cases, about 3% or so, depending on what country you look at, about 3% of cases require intensive care and respiratory support. And there are not enough respirators or beds in our community to handle something like that. And although the surveillance systems that we have are not finding in our area or elsewhere in Ontario that there is evidence now of community spread, it is the informed opinion of several very well-respected experts that just because we haven't found them yet doesn't mean that they're not there. And doing these kinds of interactions, measures to decrease the contagiousness among people in the community, they have to be done before this virus takes hold. They cannot be done, oh, things are getting bad, now we need to do something. It's already too late at that point. Nothing's going to happen and we'll be in an Italy situation. I will be damned if I let that happen to our community. And closing schools has very, very strong support in the literature for stopping transmission between students who are very efficiently pass viruses in a school situation or in a large playgroup situation such as recreational programs that we have. And that is the single most important measure. The time to do this is now. It is not later. And these are our internal modeling. This is customized by our epidemiologist, Laura Zettler, to project what could happen in Chatham-Kent. And you can see from looking from left to right that the effect of social distancing is extremely important to get this flattened. And even if we can't keep this virus out of our community, if we can keep it down to a dull roar so we don't see a large spike in cases, then maybe our health system will not be overwhelmed and we'll be able to support the people that need it most and lower the overall mortality level. So these are extraordinary times to live in, and this is an extraordinary situation. And I don't take any of these things lightly and appreciate all the support that you can give us at the Health Unit.
Anyone have questions? Councillor Pinsino.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the good doctor here. I read an article today that they have isolated where this virus is, its origin, or then they knew its origin, but they've the university in Hamilton has narrowed it down. Does that mean now they can go about finding a vaccine or whatever it is to fix this?
Through you, Your Worship, the origin of the virus is mostly important from the standpoint of preventing things like this from happening again in the future. We have lots of samples of the virus that's circulating, and it's those samples that are important for designing vaccines and testing possible therapeutic drugs. So the short answer to your question is no, but this is still very important information. I haven't read that account that you're referring to, but the genetic code of this virus is incredibly close to a virus that is circulating in bats. So I don't know what they found, but it's so close that I don't believe that's a coincidence.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Solomon.
I guess this is to April, or maybe it's to Dr. Colby. It's the what did you describe that again? I mean, I got in my head that the economy happens to operate between Canada and the United States with the biggest border crossing in North America that is simply a line that creates a border. Otherwise, I mean, we're the same as geographically as Windsor is the same geographically as Detroit is. Trucks come across every day. Are you telling me that every time a truck driver comes across, he or she has to sit by themselves for 14 days someplace? And if they do, tell me how it's being policed.
The recommendation for adults that are crossing the border after being in the United States is to monitor themselves for illness for 14 days. That doesn't mean you have to sit and do nothing, but if you do get sick, then you have to isolate and report that to the local health unit. These measures are, again, identification of cases and isolation are what has worked so far, because we haven't seen evidence of big spread or really anything more than local spread in Canada. I don't want to go too deep on this, but the World Health Organization differentiates between imported cases, locally acquired cases, and community spread. Imported cases, we all know what that is. Local spread means linked to an imported case. Mm-hmm. So we can trace the origin of it. When things get out of control and it's spreading in the community, there is no link that can be discovered to a foreign source. And our aim is to prevent that third level of community spread from taking hold here. Again, our colleagues in the academic world are warning that the time to put these measures in place is now. And you're seeing similar things that are happening in most of the provinces and territories across Canada.
Okay. So it doesn't sound to me like it's anything that a reasonable person wouldn't do without even being told. That if they knowing that there's a crisis, that if they start to have symptoms of maybe not even this flu, even if they had the one that probably kills 61,000 people in the United States last year, that they would, with the knowledge that this is going on, they would go to a hospital and find out if that's what they really have, and then it would be reported to the health unit.
Correct.
Yeah. So what causes me great concern is the panic that button that gets pushed on these things when people acting reasonably. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe people don't act reasonably, but it seems to me you've alleviated some of my concern. Acting reasonably, we're not going to slow down commerce crossing the border, the artificial border that is that between Canada and the United States. So good. Thank you for your information.
Councillor Oche?
Mayor Kenneth.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Kenneth. I also would like council to know that we are putting in a number of systems in place where at all of our long-term care homes and all our retirement homes have moved as of yesterday. For most of them, we've finalized all of them to active screening. So before we just had signs up on the doors asking people, if you're sick, stay away. We have people manned at those doors who are stopping absolutely everyone coming in the buildings and asking them specific questions around their travel history, whether or not they feel ill. And if they do feel ill, we're sending them home. We're not letting them into our facilities. And if they have travel history, we're going through all the information with them as to what they need to do. When childcare centers open, we are anticipating doing the same thing at our childcare centers. There will be active screening so that families bringing children will be stopped at the door and asked very specific questions. So, we're trying to get the message out there. We've been doing lots of kind of poster messaging and passive screening at all of our municipal facilities. Those signs all went up this afternoon, and we'll keep being diligent with that. I think finally, to kind of close this off, unless we have some other questions, I do want to impress on council that this changes every day. And so we might send something else tomorrow or the next day or the next day that is different than what we're sharing today. We, as well, are looking at our kind of messaging in terms of phone lines, and we'll be getting ready to man those phones so that we can answer people's questions.
Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to confirm, in case anyone tuned in late, there are no mild cases. This here is worst case scenario if we were to get some. There is nothing right now in Chatham-Kent.
Please let me differentiate. We have no positive cases of COVID-19 in Chatham-Kent as of now.
Right.
Your characterization of mild cases versus severe cases, those graphs include all cases. And about 97%, there's not an acute threat to life, but in about 3% there is. And the risk groups for that are older people and people with underlying medical conditions. Right. So the ones that will stay well can stay at home. What will put pressure on our medical care systems are the ones that need respiratory support and acute care.
Right.
So, and maybe I misunderstood your question, but I just wanted to clarify.
What I was worried about is somebody tuning in late, reading the top of this number of mild cases, seeking care in CPHU. Right now, we have none. So I don't want anyone reading this.
That is correct. These are projection models for the future.
And I just wanted to make sure for anyone that tuned in
Thank
late.
you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. We have no positive cases yet.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry, Dr. Colby, just to clarify on that we have no confirmed cases, that doesn't necessarily mean there's no one in Chatham-Kent that is not carrying the virus. I just want to differentiate that. Can you comment on that?
The term carrier implies to me that someone can harbor the virus for long, long periods of time, appears to be healthy, and goes around spreading it. There is a phenomenon called a super spreader that isn't too far away from that definition. It is possible that we have undetected cases in Chatham-Kent. The symptoms of this virus are not specific. There's absolutely nothing that a diagnostician could say, well, that's definitely the real McCoy here. It's not that specific. So we have to differentiate between people with compatible symptoms and those that test positive. And this is the cold and flu season. trying to differentiate between people that have respiratory tract infections of a mundane nature, which everything appears at the beginning, and this is a daunting task, which is the reason why we're looking at setting up a specific assessment center.
Councillor Bondi.
Thanks, Mayor Canavan. Doctor, just to be clear, kind of expand on what Councillor Sullivan was saying, 18 years and older, if there's any international travel there, it's a self-monitor, but 17 and younger, it's suggested that there actually is a quarantine of 14-day. So my boy, at 17, if he went to the States, is he to stay in his room for 14 days?
Yeah.
Because I hope he's listening, because he's...
Yeah, that's basically it. And the medical officer of health warrants he will get no bad comments about excess screen time under these circumstances. However... That is the case. He will not be allowed to return to school even if the schools are open for 14 days after that. And
important. Oh, sorry. There we go. Okay, great. Thanks.
Mr. Shropshire.
Thank you. I know we're going to be breaking momentarily. Just April's talked about how quickly this is changing. We will post regular updates to our website. So anybody that's listening tonight or viewing tonight's program, members of council, you can all get updates on a regular basis through our public health team's postings on our websites, and that's the best information. We're drawing that information from the medical officers of health at both our local level, our provincial level, and our federal level. So please check that out if you want an update on the best information. Thank you.
I just want to add, before we go into closed, this is going to impact all of us in one way, shape, or form over the next several weeks. And I'm confident we as a community are going to come together. We have history of Chatham-Kent coming together for whatever cause it might be. Certainly, the municipality has been working very hard itself to get ready. We need the citizens now to step up, and there's some very simple things we talked about. I just want to reemphasize those. Washing your hands. It's a very simple thing, and social distance. So with those couple of things in itself, that will help that curve go down significantly. Very simple things we can do. And when Councillor Solomon mentioned, if you're not feeling well, don't go out. We don't know, you may don't go out to social settings and hang out with friends, because that could potentially transmit it. So it's those very simple things we're asking. And the other thing is we're asking people to be calm. That we don't want people getting hysterical collectively, as we pointed out. That's what we don't want to see. We're doing these measures to protect ourselves, to ensure we don't get into that situation like Italy is in. So it's a precautionary measure, but we need to take it very seriously. So I'd encourage everyone to listen to when public health puts something out, and I'm asking to do it, please, for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your community, please listen to that, okay? So with that, we will go over to Councillor C. McGregor to move into closed session.
The council adjourned to its next meeting to be held on Monday, March 23rd at Chatham-Kent, and the Chatham-Kent Council authorized itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
Okay. So if we can ask everybody, we're going to be moving to closed session. If we could ask everyone that's not part of that.